Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast show. And today we are talking to the podcast talent coach, Erik K. Johnson. And we're going to be talking about kind of a different side of the podcasting that I sort of feel like a lot of people don't talk about, Erik. And that is the relationship side and getting engagement, not just from the audience. So welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I love being here, Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true, right? When people are podcasting, they automatically think, A, what mic should I buy? And then B is like, oh, I need to grow my audience so that I can get sponsors and dive into advertising. It just feels like they're like going from A to Z without kind of doing all the other letters in between.
Exactly. So many people come to me, oh, what microphone should I use? And I tell them nobody's listening to your podcast because of your microphone. So
Yeah.
stop worrying about it. Just be you and talk about what you love to talk about. So many people launch their podcast and they get it up and running and they go, okay, now what? Now what do I do with it? And so that's kind of where I come in. I've spent the last 3+ decades training radio talent on how to be great personalities and how to engage their audience and keep their audience coming back show after show after show and day after day, week after week to build that audience. And right around 2009, I started falling in love with podcasts and listening to podcasts. I got my first iPhone and just really loved the format. The podcasting felt like the Wild West old days of radio
Yeah.
where you just got to create your own show. But the more I listened, the more I realized, man, some of these hosts just need to know what they don't know. They need to know some of the tactics and strategies that we use in radio to get people
Mm.
to listen to our shows for a longer length of time. And so 2012 came around, I couldn't handle it anymore, and I started coaching podcasters right along with the radio talent that I was coaching. And I've been coaching podcasters ever since, helping them turn their information into entertainment. Because the only reason people come and listen to your show is because they're looking for companionship. If they just wanted your 6 steps to success, they Google that or AI would kick it out. They're coming because they want to be around you and hang out with you. So you can't just spew forth information. It's got to be entertainment, and you got to build those relationships and build those friendships with your audience to get them to come back every week.
That is such a valuable point. And I think it's hard for business owners to think in terms of entertainment. They more think of it as, yes, I'm serving my audience. Yes, I'm giving them valuable information. I want to be seen as an expert. But like it has to be enjoyable for the person to watch or listen. And it has to be enjoyable as well from the guest perspective to be on the show. How do you weave in that sense of entertainment without turning into something, that's not yourself? Like I'm not one to do jazz hands or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. A lot of people say that. Well, I'm not a big personality. I'm not Howard Stern or Oprah Winfrey or Rush Limbaugh. I'm not that big over the top kind of person. And you don't really need to be. You just
Mhm.
need to be authentic. And
Yeah.
there's two ways to do it. There's two ways. The first way is stop worrying so much about the how and stop teaching the how and spend more time with the why. Why do people want to
Mm.
do whatever it is you're talking about? The why behind it and the story behind it will get people so much more engaged than the how to do it. Nobody wants to sit and listen to the how. They want to hear about the why and stir some emotion inside of them. And the second way is to incorporate story into what you do. There's so much story in your why, even when you're interviewing others, bring that story out of them. People are engaged in story. And if you really want people to come back week after week and you want to build relationships with them, share your story because stories build friendships.
Yeah.
Friendships come through self revelation. The things you reveal about yourself endear people to you, endear you to other people. If you think about your best friend, you know everything about your best friend because they've told you every story of everything that ever happened in their life. It wasn't that you were there for everything, but they told you about it and you know everything. You know what they're thinking before they do because they've told you that. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go share your entire life on your podcast, but share pieces of it that let your audience get to know you. So your audience thinks, wow, she's just like me.
Yeah. I like that. And I'm very logistic minded. Like I'm like very like formula, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
not
totally.
regimented. But so for me, I have a hard time with stories. Like honestly, even still to this day, and I've had other people on the podcast talking about stories, and I just can't wrap my head around it from a business perspective. Like I get the podcast where it's like you're sharing like a story where you almost died or your health issue or whatever it may be. But when it comes to business, I sort of feel like are stories like my case studies of like what a client experienced. I don't know why, but I'm assuming because I'm that way, I'm sure others are too. Like, how do you wrap your head around storytelling from a business perspective?
I fought with that for such a long time because I'm a cut to the chase kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like, look, I don't have a whole lot of time for, soft talk and hand holding. Let's just tell me what you need. I'll give it to you and I can be on my way. So we're not wasting each other's time. I'm very much like that. And and I really had to slow down and concentrate and focus on building those relationships. And I'm also the kind of guy that doesn't like to talk about myself. Like, I don't want to, hey, look at me, look at all the things I did. So I talk a lot about how I've helped other people, and I tell the stories of what others have been able to accomplish by working with me.
Okay.
Um, I've never wanted to be the morning guy on the radio station, but I love being able to coach the morning guy on the radio station in order to create a fantastic show. And I've done it for multiple shows. I don't have a problem being a guy behind the curtain,
Mhm.
helping them craft their show and craft their content and learn how to tell stories that endear them to their audience. And so, as a business person, what are those case studies? What are those oh wow moments? What are those transformations you can tell? And a real easy story framework is, where were they? What crash and burn momentous occasion happened? What transformation occurred from that to make them a different person? And where are they today? And if you just tell that story, you create amazing stories. And it doesn't have to be life altering,
Mhm.
near death experiences. It could simply be, I was on a sales call. I always did my sales call this way. Then one day I was on a sales call and here's what happened.
Yeah.
And that's when I discovered X, Y, and Z. Now, today I do X, Y, and Z on every sales call, and I've been able to achieve W. And here, that's the formula. And if you tell that story in that way around anything that you've learned and that has changed your perspective on what you do, it will engage stories rather than telling your audience you just need to do A, B, and C and your
Right.
calls will be better.
Yeah. And I guess it's a matter of like, how do you illustrate a point by sharing, yeah, some story
Yeah,
to
I can
help paint the
imagine you
picture.
listen to a ton of podcasts in your line of work, and I can imagine there are a variety of podcasts you listen to where you're just like, it's flat, it's
Yeah.
information, it's not engaging, it's not you kind of you have to force yourself to focus on the content at hand rather than really being enthralled in it. And then there's those other podcasts where you're caught up listening to the show rather than working on the show, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be doing some work here, and you're actually engaged in the content itself. That's the difference between story and
Yeah.
not story.
I like how you phrase that because it is so true. I'll be, working with my team and I'm like, ooh, like that was a powerful episode, or like, oh, that was a good story, or that's a good quote, or like, yeah, I just hear the person's voice and see their facial expressions and it resonates. So, yeah.
And that's why it's so important that you don't read your episode, because
Yeah.
nobody wants you to read them a story. They want you to tell them a story.
Yeah.
And when you read it, it removes the emotion from the storytelling.
And that's why I like watching, I actually listen to podcasts on like videos on YouTube more than I listen because I like to see the faces and the
Yeah.
animation and the relationship between the two people.
Yeah. Storytelling is an art, but it's an art that can be learned. It's
Yeah.
not like you're going to learn to be Picasso and you're like, well, I can never be Picasso. It's storytelling has a structure and you just need to be that person and be emotional when you're telling it, have some inflection, change the tonality of your voice, change the pace that you're speaking. All of those things bring the story to life,
Mhm.
and that's what makes audio so much more powerful than video. If you and I are watching a video, we see the exact same thing. Very little left to the imagination. But if I'm telling you a story, it's coming to life in the theater of the mind in a way that's perfect for you. And it's going to be a lot different for me. Like if
Yeah.
you've ever read a book, like you read Harry Potter and you're like, holy cow. And then you go see the movie and you're like, huh, that's not what I thought he was going to look like.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, that's not how I pictured it in my mind. That's the genius of theater of the mind. And that's what audio can bring to life for your listeners that
Mhm.
video cannot. Because if you show them on video, we both see the exact same thing. But when I
Yeah.
tell you about it, you envision it in a way that's perfect for you.
Interesting. I've totally never thought of it that way, but yeah, you're right. So when you're a host, how do you bring those stories out of your guest? Because not you can't bank on your guest just, oh, I know they've got three stories lined up for today.
Yeah, exactly. I was coaching Oscar. He was one of my clients. Oscar came to me. Oscar is an amazing listener. Matter of fact, he teaches CEOs and type A personalities how to listen better.
Hmm.
So I listened to some of his first episodes. He did a full season, and I'm listening to them. And Oscar's a fantastic interviewer because he's a great listener. But I'm not learning anything about Oscar through these podcasts because he just asks the question and lets his guests talk. And so I said, Oscar, we need to reshape this a little bit. So you're getting them to tell some stories, what that are case studies for what you teach. And in season
Mhm.
2, I want you to teach more and then use the interviews as the case studies. And so we reshaped how he interviewed and how he asked questions. A lot of guests will ask yes, no questions or close end questions. That's the first problem.
Yeah.
They'll say, uh, how many people do you coach every week? 7. Okay. Next question. And it's just a series of questions rather than a conversation. So
Feels
instead,
awkward.
ask open-ended questions. Don't ask those yes, no questions. And the second thing that a lot of hosts do is they'll ask a question and then they'll qualify the question rather than qualifying and then asking it. For instance, I will say, um, Lindsay, how is it that you help podcasters? Because a lot of the coaches I talk with, I mean, some of them help them edit, some of them help get visibility, and some of them help, and then there's those guys, some help with the tech and others help with storytelling. And so I was just, and by this time you forgot what the question was because I'm qualifying it all. So instead, flip it and qualify it first and then ask. I would say, Lindsay, a lot of the coaches I talk with, there's some that help with tech, some that help with visibility, others help with personality. When you work with clients, how do you help them? And I end with the question and let
Mhm.
you answer it. So that's the second problem that a lot of them run into. The third is they don't ask the right questions.
Oh,
And the right questions are questions that elicit stories. So I would say, Lindsay, tell me about a time when you helped a client and it went horribly wrong. And then you would say, well, one time I did this and here's what happened. Or I would say, Lindsay, tell me about how you landed your very first client. And then you would say, well, I've been doing this and I decided to hang up my own shingle. And so my first client really didn't pay me. And then you would tell me the story of how it happened. So I ask questions that elicit stories rather than it says in your bio that you grew up in, you know, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. What was that like? It's like when you ask questions that are straight out of their bio, they've been asked those questions a million
mhm.
times. But if I say, Lindsay, tell me the one person in your life that inspires you the most and how it has affected your business. And then you could say, well, my mom always had a side hustle and she was always working and she taught me the meaning of hard work. And today when I do this, I always think of my mom and that, that's emotion and that story. So you just need to ask the right questions to elicit stories and stop reading their bio and
Mhm.
asking questions straight out of the bio.
I love that. There's some really good tips. And of course, as you're giving them, I'm like, do I do those things?
One other piece of advice,
Yeah.
set up your guest before the interview begins and tell them, "Hey, I'm looking for a couple really good stories. So as I ask your questions, if you have a story that you could throw in, that would be awesome." And a lot of times when you ask questions like this and you get your guests to tell stories, a lot of times at the end of the podcast, they'll say, "Man, Lindsay, this was a fantastic interview. This was so much fun. I told you things I've never told anybody before. Like these are questions I've never been asked." You'll hear things like that from your guest, and then they'll tell other people that you're a fantastic interviewer and they should be on your podcast.
I love that. Thank you for those tips. That's so smart. And they're easy things to do, but you just don't necessarily think of them. And sometimes
Yeah,
we're just on autopilot.
it's just got to be top of mind and remember to do it.
Yeah.
To be a great interviewer, you really only need two or three, maybe four really good questions. Then be a great listener and ask some great follow-up questions and get them to tell me about that. How did that happen? Tell me how, what was one time that that didn't work for you? Things like that, and get them to tell stories about whatever they're telling you.
That's perfect. And I also think it really helps hosts because I find when people are launching a podcast when they're new, they feel so nervous. I've heard people that like, oh, I prepped for like 45 minutes writing a big long list of questions. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, stop doing that. That's my tip. Just have a conversation. Here's the deal. It's a podcast. You're recording it. Go edit it. If you didn't like a question, if you tell me about a time when you really failed, like crash and burn, and the guy goes, that never happened." You know what? You can go edit that out. Like just take that whole question and
Yeah.
answer out and move on to the next one. Like if the question fails, take it out.
Right. And the podcast is what you make it. So it can be anything. There's no hard and fast rules. That's what I love about podcasting. You can just be
Absolutely.
yourself and yeah, have a conversation. So, speaking of conversations, we're obviously finding ways here to weave stories into our own podcast, communicate with the guest to bring stories out of them. Now, how do we make the show in general engaging just to really entice those listeners in a bigger way?
You have to be authentically you. We can't be this. A lot of podcasters go into their show trying to talk about what they think the audience wants to hear. What is the audience interested in? What should I talk about? You're going to fail when you do that. The only way to be interesting is to be interested. You have to talk about what you're interested in order to get your audience interested in it as well.
Mhm.
And to be engaging, you have to be that authentic personality. And authenticity is really overused nowadays, but you have to have that character and that personality. What makes you you? You have to create that those foundational principles that you stand for and that you stand against. You need to ruffle some feathers every now and then.
Mhm.
If I say, "Hey, everybody rate Lindsay on a 1 to 5 scale. 1, I hate the show. 5, I love the show." If everybody rates you a 3, you're dead in the water because that means nobody cares. I could take it or leave it. If it's not there, doesn't really. It's a 3. Like 3 means whatever.
Yeah.
1, I hate it. 5, I love it. As long as you have more fives than ones, it's okay to have some ones because at least you're making people pick a side.
Yeah.
The people that sit on the fence get splinters, and we don't want that. So figure out, pick a side and own it and be authentically you. So have what you know what you stand for and know what you stand against. Have some stories that back those principles up of how you've helped other people do what you do and build that foundation and that authority in your niche. If you want to be the go-to expert, you need to stand up to stand out. And in order to do that, you have to believe in what you believe in. You have to stir emotions. You have to bear yourself on your podcast, not 100%, but talk about some of your flaws and your missteps because it shows that you're human and
Yeah.
people can relate to you. And when you build those powerful relationships, that's when people come to you and that's when they come back to you. There's two ways to grow your audience. Doesn't matter if you're on a podcast, a YouTube channel, a blog, your email list, whatever. Two ways to grow. One, you need to go find people who aren't aware of you and invite them into your world. And two, you have to keep those people coming back week after week after week. Because if all you're doing is going out and getting new people and bringing them in, they're going right out the back door and nobody stays at your party. It's like putting water in a bucket with holes in it. It just
Yeah.
leaks out the bottom. It never fills up. So you have to serve both sides of that equation. And the only way to get them to come back every week is to get them to come back for you.
Yeah.
Because once they learn your 6 steps to success, they're not coming back for your content anymore. They
Yeah.
already know it. They could probably get it better on AI anyway. The only way they're going to come back is because they want to be around you.
Yeah.
And in order to be that authentic personality, you have to be authentically yourself.
Yeah. I love that. And it took me, a year or so to kind of gain that confidence and feel like I don't need to be this person. I can state my own opinion. Someone recently said I was too casual, and I'm like, that's just the way I am. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to be anything different.
Yep, exactly. Thanks for being here. And maybe I'm not you. I had one of the critics on, I don't know, maybe it was Apple Podcast Reviews or something, but then said, he just likes to tell everybody he's got 30 years of radio experience. And I'm like, well, yeah, I do, and you don't. So, I mean,
Yeah.
hate me all you want. Like, it's not like I can change it.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, seriously. So I want to pivot slightly here
Okay.
because we've been talking about relationships. We've been talking about growing your show, bringing that authenticity, your authority, relationships, the stories. But I find that a lot of podcasters will start a podcast again, looking to be like, oh, I want to monetize. I want to get sponsors. And so they're so focused on the downloads and growing the show that they kind of ignore those relationships. And I want to dive into what you talk about because I love it so much. And that is tapping into the relationship with the other person on the other end of the mic.
Yeah, there are multiple ways to monetize your podcast.
Mhm.
I think ads and sponsors are the worst thing you could do to your podcast for a variety of reasons. Ads and sponsorships are very, very difficult to sell. It takes a lot of time to go out and nurture those business relationships to get people to sponsor your podcast. Two, it usually takes 5,000 downloads an episode or more. Only 7% of all podcasts reach that. So 93% of us need to find some other way to monetize. Ads and sponsors are not the way. Third, it caps the amount of revenue you can generate because how many ads can you possibly put on your podcast? And they're not going to pay you any more for your podcast than they pay average Joe. It treats you as a commodity. And then finally, the reason I really dislike ads and sponsors is because everybody else dislikes ads and sponsors. They're fleeing traditional media to get away from it. So they're coming to podcasting. Why would you do that to your show? It's crazy. So instead, there are multiple other ways to monetize your podcast. You can turn your listeners into clients by building relationships with them and selling your own stuff, selling joint venture partner stuff to your audience. You can monetize your guests, interview potential guests, and turn them into clients. One of my clients, Zoe Routh, she's an expert on people stuff. So she goes into companies, large corporations, and helps them break down the silos between departments so departments work better together. She can't get CEOs on the phone because they know it's a sales pitch. So when I got on the phone with Zoe, I said, all right, Zoe, how many downloads do you have? And she goes, I have no idea. And I go, what do you mean? I thought all podcasters knew how many downloads they have. She goes, that's not why I use my podcast. She goes, the only reason I have a podcast is so I can open doors to CEOs.
Yeah.
She goes, if I call a CEO with my sales pitch, I can't get past the gatekeeper. But if I call a CEO because I want to invite them on my show, I get right through to them to make the invitation. Then I have a second call to do the pre-show, pre-recording interview prep call. I have a third conversation when we record the podcast. I have a fourth conversation with them when the show goes live so I can get them all the links and details to it. By this time, I have a relationship with that CEO. And now when I call to talk business, they take my call because they know me.
Mm.
She goes, I don't care how many people listen to the show. It's all about opening doors to the people that I want to get to hire me as a consultant to their business. The third way, you can interview partners, JV partners, people who will put you on their stage in front of their audience, people who have something to offer and benefit your audience. So you can interview joint venture partners as well. And the fourth thing you could do is interview mentors.
Hmm.
Interviewing mentors is fantastic. Jamie Masters started a podcast called The Eventual Millionaire. Jamie Masters was broke, didn't have two nickels to rub together. She wanted to be a millionaire. So she said, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast called The Eventual Millionaire. And all I'm going to do is interview millionaires on how they got to be millionaires. And so every episode, she would interview another millionaire. And every week, she would have a millionaire on. And so over the course of 3 years, she had interviewed 150 millionaires, and it was fantastic. She would just talk to them about how they became a millionaire, and she created an amazing business out of it and an amazing podcast. And she got all of this free coaching because she got to spend an hour every week talking to a millionaire. Like, how great is that?
Yeah.
So, turn your listeners into clients, turn your guests into clients, leverage your peers and interview them so they can put you in front of other potential clients, and then interview your mentors so they can show you how to get more clients.
I love that. And to me, that's the faster path to get results and ROI from your podcast. I think too, when people are guesting on a podcast, that they're just thinking about leads. Oh, I didn't get a lot of people that opted into the lead magnet that I shared. I'm like, there's so much more than just the leads.
Right. Well, people say, I only have 100 listeners. And I said, well, when was the last time you were on stage in front of 100 people who wanted what you had, who opted to come sit where you were? They weren't forced to come. Their boss didn't make them come. They opted to take part
Yeah.
of their spare time and sit in an audience with you, 100 people in your audience. That's what your podcast does. It gives you the opportunity to get on stage in front of these people that love what you have and want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Absolutely, for sure. I think people are so like comparison mode, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not like this podcaster who's got 1,000 downloads. And it's hard not to compare yourself with others. I think you just need to stay in your own lane. And I know you, Erik, talk to your clients a lot about what those goals are. So, therefore, like what stats to look at and how to measure success. Can you speak a little bit about that goal setting and how that fits in?
Yeah, we need to be realistic. So if you're in one of the big three niches, if you're in health, wealth, and relationships, chances are you're going to have a bigger pool to fish in and you'll probably have a little larger audience. But if you're in a niche, I have a client who is in, um, what does she call it? It's not healthcare. It's called the Caregiver Podcast. She talks to middle-aged women who are caring for their aging
Yeah.
adults while also caring for their own family. And so it's how do they take care of themselves and that sort of thing. So the Caregiver Cast is only focused on women who are trying to take care of their elderly parents because she has gone through that herself. So the pool of potential audience that she's fishing in is much, much smaller than somebody who's trying to teach people how to invest and get rich quickly. Like there's just fewer people available. So she can't compare her audience to that of Joe
No.
Rogan or Dave Ramsey or somebody like that. It's just not feasible to do that. So instead of trying to go a mile wide and an inch deep,
Mhm.
like a lot of those broad shows do, like the Dave Ramsey show or true crime shows do, where they try and go as broad as they can, but they're just superficially deep with them, you're going an inch wide and a mile deep. So you have few listeners, but you have these really powerful, strong relationships with them. So they want to consume whatever you have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like niching down allows you to be super targeted on who you want to speak to. And I find it's easier to convert people, to clients when it is super specific.
Yeah, when I talk to people about their ideal target listener, who are we talking to? Who do you want? Who can you
Mm.
help? Who listens to your show? Well, it's usually adults between 25 and 54. They make between 50 and $150,000 a year. And I go, okay, well, let's stop right there. 25 to 54 is not a target. That's a family reunion. Like that's not a target. And 50 to 150 is ridiculous because a
Yeah.
person making $50,000 is living a much different lifestyle, which with much different disposable income than a person making $150,000.
Yeah.
So identify one single individual that you can help the most, your ideal listener, and then have a conversation with that person on every episode. Just picture that person in your head and tell that person your story, and you'll be amazed at how much better you connect with your audience.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like as a podcaster, it's like, okay, you got to think about stories. You got to think about connecting with the audience, how to be entertaining, how to deliver good content, promote it. It's like, it can be overwhelming. What do you suggest to your clients to focus on when they feel like they're completely scattered and overwhelmed?
And don't focus on everything. Let's start narrowing down. So when I initially start working with clients, we start with their ideal listener. Who's the single person? And a lot of times it takes multiple calls to get them down to that one individual because they always want to hedge their bets. I say, well, what kind of car do they drive?
Yeah.
Well, maybe like a BMW or a Ford F-150. I go, okay, that two different people, like two different people. If they're
Yes.
driving a BMW, they like the way they look. They can afford money for really nice things. They like what their neighbors think about them. If they're driving an F-150 pickup, they like to get stuff done. They don't really care about how much they look, it's how much they can get their boat to the lake on
Yeah.
Sunday. Two totally different people with totally different mindsets and totally different goals. So let's focus on one single individual. When you can nail your single ideal target listener and then turn the camera inside and figure out who you are authentically, with what do you believe in, what is your dogma, what are the parables that support that dogma, and who are you, what is your origin story, and we build that first. And once we can understand that foundation, then we can build all the rest.
Yeah. So true. Now, I know you review people's podcasts,
I do.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
I do
that.
that for my clients, so I listen to it. And what I'm really listening for is, what do I learn about you that I didn't know when the episode began? Like, what is something, how did our relationship get stronger by me listening to this podcast? Now, if
Mm,
you're just giving me your 6 steps to success, the answer is going to be zero. I didn't learn anything. But if
yeah.
you tell me a story about how your dog got away from you in the park on Saturday and, this crazy thing, and here's what you discovered, and here's how it's relating back to your business, now I know a little something about you. I know you have dogs. I know you like going to the park on Saturday. I know that you're not perfect. I
Yeah.
learned some things about you. And so that's really what I'm trying to help people do is when I'm helping coaches become the go-to expert in their niche, I really want to help them become themselves and build that powerful
Mm,
relationship with their audience. And so when I review the podcast, that's what I'm looking for. It's how are we building that relationship by telling stories of ourselves and stories of our clients and really engaging. People try and teach so much in a podcast, and people are really going to walk away from your podcast remembering one big thing. You don't have to teach everything. Just give them one thing to walk
yeah.
away with and remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're not going to remember all that stuff anyways.
Exactly. Nobody's taking notes. They're listening to it for
No.
entertainment. If they want the how, they'll sign up for your strategy call or your discovery call or your mini course or whatever it is you have to offer, and they'll come and get your how that way.
Yeah. I really feel like we've been, just like we stated at the beginning, really talked about that personal side of podcasting, right? Like the stories, being
Yeah.
authentic, the conversations, building those relationships. Um, at the beginning of our conversation, I thought it was going to go one way, but that's the beauty of podcasting.
Yeah.
And I think if people are focusing on being authentic and building those relationships with the audience and other people, to me, like that makes it more fun than thinking about production and editing and all the technical stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are people that come to me and they say, "Yeah, but I'm not a personality. I'm not funny. I don't know if I can do this."
Oh,
And everybody can do it. You have a personality. Everybody has a
yeah.
personality. It's just we need to identify which characteristics in that personality we want to highlight through story on your podcast. I have a great resource actually that you can take. It's an assessment to figure
Perfect.
out where the gaps are as you're trying to become that influential authority in your niche, that go-to expert. What you want to use your podcast for is to build that relationship so that when your audience is ready to solve their problem, they think of you.
Yeah.
Are you ready to become that authority? This authority assessment will help you identify where the gaps are in your character, in your makeup, in your authenticity on your show. If you go to podcasttalentcoach.com/assessment, you can download that for free. It'll walk you through probably 21 questions. They're yes or no questions to identify the gaps in your influence and in your authority so you know where you need to work.
Yeah, because like you said at the beginning, sometimes you can't see what you can't see, and you do
Yeah.
need to look to an expert to kind of see what's going on, what's missing. And sometimes it's an easy fix, right?
Yeah, when you take that assessment, there will be things in there you will, oh, I never thought about that.
Right.
Like one of the major characteristics of a powerful interviewer
Mhm.
is the power of curiosity. If you have a strong sense of curiosity, you will be a great interviewer. Because as I said, you only need a few great questions and
Yeah.
then ask great follow-up questions. If you're naturally curious and you're listening to the answers of your guest, you will ask great follow-up questions and you'll become a great interviewer. So if you don't have the ability to be curious, you can develop that ability to be curious. What are you looking for in an answer? How do you ask great follow-up questions? How do we develop that curiosity within you to make you more curious, to make you a stronger uh, podcast host? Because you're not born with influence, you learn it. And so these
Mm.
21 steps here will help you learn how to be influential.
That's awesome. And I'll obviously have that in the show notes. I feel like my biggest takeaway today from you was thinking the four questions that you ask someone and then the dig in questions and the follow up after that. And I mean, I'm naturally curious, so I always ask things that I want to know. Just
Yeah.
figure that everyone else wants to know it. Um, but yeah, just simplifying it so that it's not so overwhelming for the host that asks these questions and
Yeah, it's the perfect way
honestly,
to get
yeah,
your guests to tell you their story.
yes, yeah, great tips. I
You
so
bet.
appreciate you having you on the show, hearing your expertise, and just so that other podcasters can find ways to monetize and get ROI without being so focused on the downloads.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many other ways to do it, and you don't need a huge audience.
Yeah.
You just need the right guests and the right people listening, and you will be well on your way.
Yeah. Perfect. So go to podcasttalentcoach.com/assessment to grab that. And I'll, of course, have it in the show notes. And how else can people get a hold of you, Erik?
If you go over to podcasttalentcoach.com, all of my contact
Okay.
information is there. You can find other helpful worksheets there. You can find interview questions. All of my contact information is there. Links to everything I have, including my podcast, which is Podcast Talent Coach. You can find it all at podcasttalentcoach.com.
Perfect. All right. Thank you again for your wisdom and for coming on the show. Great conversation. And yeah,
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I
yeah.
truly appreciate it.
Thanks. All right. So that is another episode, folks. And we will see you next week on the Leverage Your Podcast show.